We have a full panel to break down all of this. MS Now White House reporter Laura Barone Lopez, co-host of The Weekend, Eugene Daniels, Connecticut Insider senior data editor and columnist Philip Bump, former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent, and Democratic pollster Fernand Amandi. Eugene, you covered the Harris campaign closely. What do you take away from this report?
Yeah, the first thing I take away from the report is I'm like trying to dig through it. I wish you could see the desk here, is that at the end of the day, this report doesn't appear to be that well done. You saw Ken Martin say that in his announcement, saying, when I received the report late last year, it wasn't ready for prime time. That was what sources of mine were saying, and I talked about this on The Weekend a few weeks ago, that the concern wasn't that it had a smoking gun or that it was even super clear about what was happening, or there was something that hadn't been said about why Harris lost in 2024, why Democrats didn't do well, but that it wasn't well done. So that's my first takeaway. I'm looking at this one page where the DNC is having to say no evidence provided, section was not provided, analysis not supported by data, appears to be missing a whole state. That's number one. Number two is a lot of the things that are in here that you can glean, they're in line with what Democrats have been saying. And this is the thing that's so important about presidential campaigns right now, which is at the end of the day, every single thing counts when you have a country as split as ours. And trying to figure out why one thing was why Kamala Harris lost in 2024 is never going to happen. I will say early on in one of the summaries, what I think the most important thing is for the DNC and for Democrats is this de-investment in state parties that it talks about, not focusing on building from the ground up. This is something that DNC Chair Ken Martin has tried and says that they are working on fixing. But that is the key to this, because the states folks that I talked to all through 2024, whether it was Biden or Harris at the top of the ticket, they said they weren't getting enough resources, enough money, and sometimes their phone calls weren't being returned. This many-page, almost 200-page report shows that that ends up being true.
Fernand, the executive summary is missing. This report doesn't get into whether it was a good idea for Biden to run for re-election. No mention over the Democratic division on Gaza, and little on the decision to have Harris take over the ticket without facing challengers. If the Democrats aren't assessing those issues, can they learn anything?
Well, and I think they can, and I think we're starting to see that now. Like Eugene, I've got a stack of papers of the autopsy. I'm trying to go through as much as I can, but I think one of the things that has stood out that comes clear from the autopsy report, and I think it's consistent with what Democrats have been saying that want to change the dynamic, is that Democrats have to start a lot earlier. They have to always be on in a campaign apparatus that, unfortunately, in this day and era and age is permanent. It needs to be full-time. And the lesson from 2024 was defining the opposition early. I don't think that they really did that well, but I do see signs of that changing now. And how do we know that, Anna? Look at the state of the country today. Look at Donald Trump today, a man who managed to win re-election less than a year and a half ago. Today, as we have this conversation, is at the lowest approval rating of his presidency in any term, one of the lowest we've seen in a while, 31%. You've seen the success that Democrats have had in elections across the country since 2025. And part of that is around the new focus that I think the autopsy report talks about, zeroing in not on the culture war issues, but the kitchen table issues, the affordability concerns, the cost of living crisis that every American, including those watching right now, are all litigating with no answers by this administration. If anything, the pain has gotten worse, despite their promises on day one to change that. I think those are the lessons that Democrats are looking at. They're trying to implement. And right now, it seems to be working because the country, and judging the two governing styles, is saying they're rejecting this approach by Trump and the Republicans. And that's why you see congressional Democrats leading the ballot by double digits and poised to recapture the House if they stay on this aggressive footing in November.
Philip, the DNC admits to neglecting Harris, not setting her up for success, despite her being the vice president for the oldest living president in history at the time. Is this the biggest area where the campaign dropped the ball?
It's hard to isolate a particular thing regardless of the report or what happened in 2024. Every election is unique, but I don't think any election has been as unique as 2024, between Biden dropping out, Trump running for re-election, the ongoing effects of the COVID pandemic. I think that the safest assessment of any realistic and honest assessment of 2024 is prices were up and Biden was unpopular. Those were the central factors. And so there's a lot of litigating about what that means for the party in terms of, what they could have done better in 2024. Of course, they could have done things better. Of course, Harris, I think, was poorly positioned in the way that I think vice presidents traditionally are, particularly when it's not clear that they're going to be running for president immediately, which it wasn't in 2023. But, I think that there are probably not, and I have not spent a lot of time with the report, as none of us have because it just came out, but yeah. I think there are probably not a lot of lessons from 2024 which apply well to the moment, in part because that moment and this moment are very, very different circumstances. And I think that the party already hears from the base. There's a big piece in the New York Times today about what it is they want the party to do. And I think spending a lot of time litigating what happened in that very weird and unusual election probably doesn't do the party much good.
In fact, it was Ken Martin who had said they were going to just kind of set this aside and focus forward, not backwards. So it is interesting that suddenly that has shifted. Congressman, what should reports like this accomplish?
Well, it's important that parties do this. Republicans did it after Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama in 2013. And, you got to take your medicine. And it's important to be transparent about it. It seems to me that the Democratic National Committee hasn't been completely transparent. It seems like this report is still missing a lot of important information. But I think what everybody just said here is correct. At the end of the day, a winning campaign does a lot of little things right. A losing campaign often gets a lot of things wrong. But when the presidential approval rating was as low as it was and the economy being front of mind and Trump had an advantage, I think that was clearly what drove the election to Donald Trump and away from Kamala Harris. But I think the Democratic Party needs to be much more transparent and honest about what actually happened then with respect to Joe Biden dropping out of the race.
Laura, what are your key takeaways? And what is DNC Chair Ken Martin saying about the report?
Well, first on what Ken Martin is saying, he's basically expectation setting and trying to get out ahead of maybe the rest of this report, because, again, this is only a piece of it. But Ken Martin, the DNC chair, said, quote, "I am not proud of this product. It does not meet my standards, and it won't meet your standards. I don't endorse what's in this report or what's left out of it. I could not, in good faith, put the DNC stamp of approval on it, but transparency is paramount. So today I am releasing the report as I received it in its entirety, unedited and unabridged, with annotations for claims that couldn't be verified." But again, there are key things missing, as Eugene pointed out, like Gaza, and also you pointed out, Anna, in terms of, the fact that there was no primary to replace Joe Biden. But when it comes to some of my key takeaways, the fact that the autopsy report says that that Democrats, it's kind of a classic Democratic takeaway, that Democrats should not engage in, quote, identity politics, even though so much of the Trump's attacks on Harris and so much of the Trump's campaign was about identity politics, whether it was about January 6th and those that were convicted, whether it was about, injecting more Christianity into government and Christian nationalism, or the anti-transgender attack ads that the campaign launched. Those are all identity politics. And then another big key piece of the Trump campaign was on immigration, anti-immigrant, closing borders, saying that they wanted to totally deport as many people as possible, in the millions. That also is identity politics. And it's something that the Harris campaign didn't engage on at all. So the takeaway that they had no answer or couldn't answer there is a bit striking.
Eugene, I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around the timing here. If Ken Martin is saying this report's not ready for prime time, having already said he wasn't going to release it, and of course right now we're in this busy news cycle where there are a lot of negative headlines that are confronting the Trump administration and Republicans. So what is the strategy of putting this out there now?
I think, one, there are so many things that we are focused on when it comes to Trump. So they're probably expecting this won't get as much airtime as it would have had it been put out if there was a quieter time during the second Trump administration. But I also think there was just too much pressure. I've been talking to folks at the DNC and outside of it, folks who've been talking to them throughout this entire process, folks who should have been interviewed for this and weren't, folks who were interviewed. And what I've been hearing mostly from people is that everyone just wanted something. Right. And I think for Democrats, what's so interesting about them just as a party overall, they like a lot of data. They want information, even if that information is incomplete which is what we got today. And so I think Ken Martin's back and forth with a lot of different reporters. He came on our show and there was a back and forth about why not release it. And the pressure was too immense. And at the end of the day, the hit that they're going to take for this being a kind of, I don't know, raggedy report, which is what I would call it, like a very confusing, isn't very clear, doesn't seem that well done, even according to the chair of the Democratic National Committee. That is probably less of a hit they're going to take than not doing it. It's been going on for such a long time. But had they released this months and months and months ago, we wouldn't have moved on. The party could focus forward. But now we'll have a couple more, probably another couple of weeks of Democrats going back and forth about what's in this.